The purchase of my home in Oakwood Estates represented more than just real estate investment. It symbolized a hard-won victory after 2 decades of service to my country. I had spent 15 years climbing the ranks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, breaking barriers as a black woman in spaces traditionally dominated by white men. When I finally achieved the position of Assistant Director in charge of the Criminal Investigative Division, I decided it was time to establish roots somewhere peaceful. My criteria were specific when searching for a home. I needed security, privacy, and proximity to the field office. Oakwood Estates offered all three with its gated community setup, spacious lots, and location just 20 minutes from downtown. The colonial-style house with its red brick facade and white columns spoke to the history buff in me, but it was the backyard that truly sold the property. The previous owners had transformed the space into a private oasis. Mature oak trees lined the perimeter, providing natural shade and privacy from neighboring properties. A stone patio extended from the back of the house, and lush garden beds filled with native plants attracted butterflies and birds. The crowning jewel was a small meditation area tucked into the corner beneath a pergola draped with wisteria vines. On my days off, which were precious and rare, I established a ritual. I would wake early, brew a strong cup of coffee, and take my current novel to the backyard. After the constant vigilance required by my position, these moments of solitude were essential for maintaining my mental equilibrium. The agency psychologist had emphasized the importance of creating boundaries between work and home life. Sunbathing became my way of physically and mentally decompressing. My transition into the neighborhood had been relatively smooth for the first 6 months. The HOA president welcomed me with a basket of local artisanal products. Several neighbors invited me to their barbecues and holiday gatherings. I noticed certain looks occasionally, surprise or curiosity when they discovered my profession, but nothing overtly hostile. There were minor tensions, of course. Mrs. Henderson from across the street seemed offended when I declined her invitation to join the neighborhood watch, not understanding that I valued the separation between my professional and personal lives. Mr. Collins raised eyebrows when I installed additional security cameras around my property. But these were inconsequential friction points, easily navigated with diplomatic smiles and polite explanations. I had noticed the moving truck 3 weeks earlier. The house directly behind mine had been vacant for months before the new owner arrived. I caught glimpses of her through the trees, a middle-aged white woman with a blonde bob and a seemingly permanent expression of disapproval. We had not formally met, but I had nodded politely when our eyes met across our adjoining property line. She had not returned the gesture. My instincts, honed through years of behavioral analysis, suggested something was off about her demeanor, but I dismissed the thought. Not everyone needed to be friendly. Privacy was, after all, what I valued most about this neighborhood. I had no idea those peaceful days were about to end, and my backyard sanctuary would become the stage for a confrontation that would ripple through our entire community. The Saturday that changed everything began like any other rest day. The summer heat had settled over the city, and the forecast promised temperatures in the mid-90s. I had completed my morning run by 7 and spent the early hours answering emails that had accumulated during the week. By noon, I was ready for my ritual relaxation time. I changed into my navy blue swimsuit, applied sunscreen methodically, and gathered my essentials: a glass of iced green tea, my current novel about civil rights history, and a small portable speaker for soft background music. The heat enveloped me as I stepped onto the patio, the stone warm beneath my feet. I arranged my lounger to catch the perfect balance of sun and shade, and settled in for a few hours of precious tranquility. From my vantage point, I could see fragments of neighboring houses through the trees, but the landscaping provided enough privacy that I felt completely at ease. I had just reached a particularly engrossing chapter in my book when I noticed movement from the house behind mine. The new neighbor was in her yard, looking in my direction. Even from a distance, I could feel the intensity of her stare. She disappeared inside only to return moments later with what appeared to be a phone to her ear. I had encountered her briefly the previous week while collecting my mail. Her name was Patricia Wilson, though she had introduced herself as Pat from the Neighborhood Enhancement Committee. Her first words to me had been a thinly veiled complaint about my garbage bins being visible from the street for slightly longer than the HOA-approved time frame. When I explained I had been called away for an emergency at work, her response was a tight smile and a comment about everyone needing to follow the same rules regardless of how important their jobs might be. The memory of that interaction made me uneasy, but I returned to my book. The FBI taught agents to assess situations objectively, not to jump to conclusions based on limited information. Perhaps she was simply curious about her new neighbor. I had experienced enough unwarranted suspicion in my life and career to avoid projecting it onto others without cause. 45 minutes later, the distinctive sound of sirens broke the afternoon quiet. At first, I assumed they were passing by on the main road, but the sound grew louder rather than fading. Years of training kicked in as I sat up straight, instantly alert. The sirens stopped abruptly, and I heard car doors slamming, followed by voices at my front gate. I wrapped a towel around my waist and moved toward the side of the house. Two police officers, one tall and lanky, the other stockier with a crew cut, were opening my gate. Behind them stood Patricia Wilson, her arms crossed over her chest, a look of vindication on her face. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," the taller officer called out, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster as he spotted me. The second officer stepped forward. "We received a call about a suspicious person potentially trespassing on this property." The absurdity of the situation momentarily stunned me into silence. I was standing in my own backyard, being approached by police officers with hands near their weapons, while my neighbor watched with undisguised satisfaction. "Could you please identify yourself and explain your presence here?" the first officer asked, his tone making it clear this was a command, not a request. The humiliation burned through me like a physical sensation. I was suddenly acutely aware of my exposure, standing in a swimsuit, not the power suits I wore at headquarters, not the tactical gear I had worn in the field. In that moment, I was not Assistant Director Mason of the FBI. I was simply a black woman being questioned about my right to exist in a space that belonged to me. "This is my home," I stated, my voice steadier than I felt. "I live here." Patricia Wilson stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "I have never seen this woman before. I just moved in 3 weeks ago, and there has never been anyone living in this house." The officers looked between us, uncertainty flickering across their faces. It was a moment of perfect, terrible clarity, my word against hers, and they had chosen to believe her without question. The world seemed to slow down as I assessed my options. In my professional life, I had faced armed suspects, orchestrated high-risk operations, and testified before congressional committees. Yet somehow, this violation in my most private space felt more personally devastating than any of those challenges. "Officers, I would like your badge numbers and names, please," I said, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I used in the field. The shift in my demeanor was subtle but immediate. I stood straighter, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, the posture of someone accustomed to command. The officers exchanged glances, clearly noting the change. The taller one spoke first. "Ma'am, I am Officer James Brennan, badge number 8742. This is Officer Miguel Santos, badge number 6519. We are responding to a call about a potential trespasser." "I appreciate your prompt response to a concerned citizen's call," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "However, there has been a significant misunderstanding. My name is Director Vivian Mason. I am the Assistant Director of the Criminal Investigative Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and this is my residence." I watched as the information registered on their faces. Officer Santos blinked rapidly, while Officer Brennan's posture visibly stiffened. Patricia Wilson's mouth opened slightly, but her expression quickly hardened into skepticism. "Do you have identification to verify that?" Officer Brennan asked, his tone now considerably more respectful. "Of course. If you would allow me to go inside to retrieve my credentials, I would be happy to provide them." Officer Santos nodded. "We will accompany you, ma'am." I led them through the French doors into my living room. The contrast between the bright sunlight and the cooler interior momentarily disoriented me. Or perhaps it was the surreality of leading police officers through my own home to prove I belonged there. I retrieved my FBI credentials from the safe in my office and returned to the living room. The officers studied my identification with careful attention. I could see the exact moment when Officer Brennan realized the magnitude of the situation. His face paled slightly as he handed my credentials back with a noticeably shaking hand. "Assistant Director Mason, I sincerely apologize for the disturbance," he said, his voice formal and strained. "We were responding to a report of an unknown individual on the property." "I understand you were doing your job, Officer Brennan," I replied. "However, I am concerned about the nature of this call and the response. Was there any attempt to verify the report before approaching me as a potential criminal?" Officer Santos shifted uncomfortably. The caller identified herself as a neighbor who was concerned about suspicious activity. Department protocol requires us to respond to all such calls. I nodded slowly. "And where is the caller now?" "Outside, ma'am," Officer Brennan replied. "Would you like to speak with her?" "Absolutely." We moved back outside where Patricia Wilson was still standing by the gate, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. When she saw my FBI credentials, her eyes widened momentarily before her expression settled into something harder. "Mrs. Wilson," I began, "I understand you called the police reporting a trespasser on my property." "I did not know this was your property," she said, her voice tight. "I have never seen you here before." "I have lived here for over 6 months," I replied calmly. "We even spoke briefly last week when you introduced yourself as part of the Neighborhood Enhancement Committee." Patricia's cheeks flushed. "You do not look like," she began, then stopped abruptly. "I do not look like what, Mrs. Wilson?" I asked, though I knew precisely what she had almost said. "You do not look like you belong in Oakwood Estates," she finished, lifting her chin defiantly. The silence that followed her statement was deafening. Both officers looked profoundly uncomfortable, but neither spoke up. I activated the voice recorder on my phone, holding it visibly in my hand. "Mrs. Wilson, to clarify, you called emergency services to report me as a trespasser because you did not believe someone who looks like me could own a home in this neighborhood. Is that correct?" "I was doing my duty as a concerned citizen," she insisted. "There have been break-ins reported in the area." I turned to the officers. "Has there been an increase in residential break-ins in Oakwood Estates recently?" Officer Santos shook his head. No, ma'am. This remains one of the lowest crime areas in the district. After Patricia stormed off and the officers left with numerous apologies, I returned inside my home. The sanctuary I had created no longer felt secure. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, water dripping from my face after splashing it repeatedly. The woman looking back at me was not the confident assistant director Mason, but the exhausted Vivian who had spent her entire life proving she belonged in spaces that others felt entitled to deny her. My hands shook slightly as I poured myself a glass of water. How many others had faced similar situations without the shield of federal credentials? How many confrontations had escalated because the person being questioned did not have the authority I carried? The questions haunted me as I moved through the rooms of my home, suddenly seeing them through Patricia Wilson's eyes, as a space she believed I had no right to occupy. That evening I called my sister Angela, recounting the incident in precise detail. Her outrage was immediate and visceral. "You need to file a complaint, Vive. This was racial profiling, plain and simple." "I know," I replied, "but I also know this is not just about me. This is about using my position to address a larger issue." As I ended the call, a plan was already forming in my mind. The FBI had taught me to be methodical, to gather evidence, to build cases that were unassailable. Patricia Wilson had unknowingly challenged the wrong woman, not because I was powerful, but because I understood exactly how systems worked and how they could be changed. Monday morning arrived with a renewed sense of purpose. I had taken Sunday to process my emotions, allowing myself to feel the full weight of the violation before channeling that energy into action. Now it was time to approach this methodically, the way I would approach any complex investigation. I requested a personal day from the Bureau, something I rarely did outside of planned vacations. My deputy director sounded surprised but asked no questions. The trust I had built over years of dedicated service meant I did not need to explain myself. This was a personal matter, but it required my full professional attention. My dining room table transformed into a command center by 9 in the morning. Laptop open, legal pad ready, phone set to record conversations. I began by researching local ordinances regarding false police reports. The city code was clear. Knowingly making a false report to law enforcement was a misdemeanor punishable by fines and potentially jail time. Additionally, the state had recently passed legislation specifically addressing racially motivated 911 calls, categorizing them as potential hate crimes depending on the circumstances. My next call was to Captain Alina Richards, an old colleague from my early days at Quantico, who now headed the local police department's internal affairs division. "Vivian, it has been too long," she greeted me warmly. The familiarity dissipated quickly as I explained the situation. Her professional demeanor took over. "This is exactly the kind of case our new community relations unit was established to address," she explained. "The officers should have attempted verification before approaching you as a suspect. I would like to review their body camera footage, with your permission." "Of course," I replied. "But Alina, this is not about punishing those officers. They were responding to a call. My concern is with the person who weaponized them against me." "I understand. Still, this provides an opportunity for departmental learning. If you are willing, we could use this case for training purposes. Anonymized, of course." After ending the call, I turned my attention to my own security footage. When I purchased the house, I had installed a comprehensive system that covered the perimeter of my property, another habit from years in law enforcement. I accessed the cloud storage and began reviewing footage from the past month. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. Patricia Wilson had been watching my house. The camera captured her standing at her back fence, observing my property on multiple occasions. Twice she had walked along our shared property line, taking photos with her phone. There was even footage of her pointing out my house to another neighbor, gesturing emphatically. The surveillance was obvious and intentional. My phone rang. Gabriela Rodriguez, my attorney and friend from law school. I had sent her a brief summary of the incident earlier that morning. "Vivian, this is textbook harassment," she said after I filled in the details. "With your security footage and the officer's body camera video, we have enough for a restraining order at minimum, but I suggest we gather more information before proceeding legally." "Agreed," I replied. "I want to understand if this is an isolated incident or part of a pattern." "Smart documentation is crucial here. Keep recording everything." My next step was reaching out to other neighbors. I had maintained cordial but distant relationships with most residents of Oakwood Estates. Now I needed to leverage those connections. I began with James and David Kim Chen, who lived 3 houses down. As a gay interracial couple, they might have insights into the community dynamics I had missed. "We are not surprised," James said when I called. "Patricia cornered David last month, asking how long he had been working for the family that owned our house. David has only lived in this country for 30 years and is a thoracic surgeon at University Hospital." Similar stories emerged as I contacted other neighbors. The Patel family had received multiple HOA violation notices since Patricia joined the board, despite having lived in compliance for years. Maria Gonzalez, a retired judge, mentioned that Patricia had questioned her credentials when Maria offered legal perspectives during an HOA meeting. The pattern was unmistakable. Patricia Wilson was targeting residents who did not fit her vision of who belonged in Oakwood Estates. My law enforcement training had taught me to look for patterns, and this one was clear and concerning. By mid-afternoon, I had compiled a substantial dossier. The evidence suggested that Patricia's behavior constituted a pattern of harassment with racial undertones. I now had statements from 6 different households describing similar experiences. My security footage showed clear evidence of targeted surveillance. The police report and body camera footage would provide official documentation of the most recent incident. I considered my options carefully. My first instinct had been rage, to use every legal tool at my disposal to ensure Patricia faced maximum consequences. But years of experience had taught me that vindictive approaches rarely created lasting change. What I wanted was not just personal justice, but community transformation. I drafted a multi-phase plan, the kind I would develop for complex bureau operations. Phase 1 would involve direct communication, giving Patricia the opportunity to acknowledge her behavior and make amends. Phase 2 would escalate to community involvement through the HOA. Phase 3, if necessary, would move to formal legal channels. My FBI training had instilled in me the importance of proportional response. This was not about crushing an opponent, but about creating accountability and lasting change. Patricia Wilson had unknowingly set in motion a process that would transform our neighborhood's culture. The skills I had honed hunting the country's most dangerous criminals would now be applied to a different kind of justice. As evening fell, I reviewed my strategy one final time. Tomorrow, I would attempt direct communication with Patricia, not because I believed she deserved the courtesy, but because true justice required giving her the opportunity to choose a better path. The confrontation would be difficult but necessary. I closed my laptop, feeling a strange sense of calm. This was familiar territory, building a case, pursuing justice, standing firm against those who abused power. The following morning dawned clear and bright. I dressed deliberately, choosing clothes that conveyed authority without intimidation, tailored charcoal slacks, a cream blouse, and low heels. Professional but approachable. My badge and credentials remained at home. This was a neighbor-to-neighbor conversation, not a federal intervention. At precisely 10 o'clock, I stood on Patricia Wilson's front porch and rang the doorbell. The chime echoed inside the house, followed by footsteps approaching the door. When she opened it, her expression shifted rapidly from neutral to guarded as she recognized me. "Mrs. Wilson," I began, "I believe we need to have a conversation about what happened on Saturday. May I come in?" She hesitated visibly. "This is not a good time." "I understand. However, this matter is important. I am here as your neighbor, hoping we can resolve this situation privately before it escalates further." Patricia glanced past me, perhaps checking if anyone was watching this exchange. Finally, she stepped back, opening the door wider. "Fine, but I do not have much time." Her living room was meticulously arranged, family photos prominently displayed on the mantel. I noticed they all featured white family members, children, grandchildren, a wedding photo. She did not offer me a seat, so we remained standing, an uncomfortable several feet apart. "Mrs. Wilson, I want to address what happened when you called the police reporting me as a trespasser in my own backyard." "I was concerned about suspicious activity," she replied immediately. "I did not know it was your property." "We had met the previous week," I reminded her. "You introduced yourself as part of the Neighborhood Enhancement Committee." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "There are many new faces in the neighborhood. I cannot be expected to remember everyone." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "I understand. Yet you were certain enough that I did not belong to call emergency services rather than inquiring with the HOA about the property owner." "I was doing my civic duty," she insisted. "If you had simply identified yourself properly—" "Mrs. Wilson," I interrupted calmly, "I was sunbathing in my private backyard. I had no obligation to identify myself to anyone. The question is why you assumed I was not the homeowner." Patricia's posture stiffened. "I do not appreciate what you are implying." "I am not implying anything. I am stating directly that your actions appear to be part of a pattern of targeting residents who do not fit your perception of who belongs in Oakwood Estates." Her face flushed with anger. "That is absurd. I have been an upstanding member of every community I have lived in. I have spoken with other neighbors who have had similar experiences with you," I continued, maintaining my composure. "The Patel family, the Kim Chens, Judge Gonzalez. Those were legitimate HOA violations," she snapped. "This community has standards." "Standards that seem to be enforced selectively," I noted. "My security cameras show you photographing my property multiple times over the past month." At the mention of security footage, something flickered in her eyes, the realization that I had documentation of her behavior. She took a step back. "You have been spying on me." Her voice rose sharply. "I have standard security measures installed on my property, as most federal agents do," I corrected her. "The cameras captured your repeated surveillance of my home." "I want you to leave now," Patricia said, her voice trembling slightly. "This conversation is over." "I came here hoping we could resolve this situation amicably," I replied. "I was giving you an opportunity to acknowledge your behavior and commit to changing it. That option remains available to you." "Are you threatening me?" Her voice was indignant. "Not at all. I am informing you of facts and offering a path forward that avoids formal complaints. The choice is yours." Patricia walked to her front door and pulled it open. "Get out of my house, and if you harass me again, I will file a complaint with your supervisors." I left without another word, having confirmed what I already suspected. Patricia Wilson was not interested in reflection or reconciliation. The peaceful resolution I had offered had been rejected. It was time for phase 2 of my plan. The quarterly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. I arrived 30 minutes early, carrying a folder of carefully organized documentation. Several board members were already setting up chairs in the community room of the local library. I recognized Martha Jenkins, the HOA president, a retired professor who had welcomed me to the neighborhood when I first moved in. "Director Mason, it is good to see you," she greeted me warmly. "I do not believe you have attended one of our meetings before." "I appreciate the welcome, Martha, and please call me Vivian. I would like to request some time during the meeting to address a community concern." She looked intrigued. "Of course. We have an open forum section at the end for residents to raise issues." "Thank you. I believe this matter affects the entire community and deserves proper attention." The room filled steadily over the next half hour. I noticed familiar faces, the Patels, the Kim Chens, Judge Gonzalez, all nodding in my direction. Word had clearly spread about my intention to speak. Patricia Wilson arrived just before the meeting was scheduled to begin, taking a seat near the front, her back rigid with tension. The meeting proceeded through standard business, budget approvals, landscaping contracts, a discussion about repaving the community walking paths. Finally, Martha announced the open forum portion. "We have one resident who has requested time to address the community. Director Mason, the floor is yours." I moved to the front of the room, placing my folder on the small podium. The room fell silent as I surveyed the assembled neighbors. This was not unlike briefing senior officials at the Bureau, but the stakes felt oddly more personal. "Good evening, everyone. For those who do not know me, I am Vivian Mason. I have lived in Oakwood Estates for 6 months now. I am here to discuss an incident that occurred recently that I believe reflects a concerning pattern in our community." I proceeded to describe the events of the previous Saturday in precise, unemotional terms. I did not name Patricia explicitly yet, focusing instead on the broader issue. When police are called on residents for simply existing in their own homes, it creates an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. It turns neighbors into threats rather than community members. Patricia's face had grown increasingly flushed as I spoke. Finally, she stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she interrupted. "She is trying to make this about race when it was about security. I did not know she lived there." Martha Jenkins intervened. "Patricia, please wait your turn to speak." "No, I will not sit here and be accused of racism." Patricia's voice rose sharply. "I have been trying to maintain the standards of this community since I moved here. Do you know property values drop when neighborhoods become too diverse?" A collective gasp rippled through the room. Patricia seemed to realize what she had revealed and attempted to backtrack. "That is not what I meant. I meant when standards are not maintained." I remained calm, letting her words hang in the air. After a moment, I continued. "I would like to share something else with the community. After speaking with several neighbors, I discovered that similar incidents have occurred with other residents." I glanced around the room. Would anyone who has experienced similar treatment feel comfortable sharing their story? David Kimchen stood first. "Last month, Mrs. Wilson asked if I was the gardener when she saw me planting flowers in my own front yard. When I explained I lived there, she demanded to see proof of ownership. Mrs. Patel rose next. We have received 7 HOA violation notices since Mrs. Wilson joined the board, all for issues that many other homes have: a basketball hoop, children's toys visible from the street, but only our home was cited. One by one, neighbors shared similar experiences. The pattern was undeniable. Patricia Wilson sat rigid in her chair, her expression oscillating between defiance and dawning horror as the community united against her behavior. Martha Jenkins finally spoke, her voice heavy with disappointment. Patricia, these are serious allegations that appear to show a pattern of discriminatory behavior. As HOA president, I cannot ignore this. The meeting descended into intense discussion. Community members expressed outrage, concern, and ultimately, a desire for change. By the end of the evening, the HOA board had agreed to review all recent violations for potential bias and to develop a new community code of conduct that explicitly addressed discrimination. As the meeting concluded, I noticed Patricia sitting alone, no one approaching to speak with her. The community had made its position clear. This was not just about me anymore. It was about what kind of neighborhood Oakwood Estates would choose to be. The days following the HOA meeting brought rapid developments. Captain Richards called to inform me that the police department had completed their review of the officer's body camera footage. The department was updating their protocols for responding to suspicious person calls, requiring dispatch to gather more detailed information before officers approached anyone as a potential suspect. The officers will receive additional training, she explained. But I also wanted you to know that we are investigating the possibility of charges against Mrs. Wilson for filing a false police report. I had mixed feelings about this. While accountability was important, my goal was not punishment but transformation. I appreciate that, Eleanor. If possible, I would prefer educational measures over punitive ones. That might not be entirely your decision, she replied gently. This incident has caught the attention of the district attorney's office. They are considering it as a potential test case for the new law addressing racially motivated 911 calls. This was unexpected. I had wanted accountability, but now the situation was growing beyond my control. By that afternoon, a local news van had appeared at the entrance to Oakwood Estates. A reporter approached me as I returned from work. "Director Mason, can you comment on the incident involving your neighbor calling the police on you for being in your own backyard? Sources say the district attorney is considering pressing charges." I maintained my professional composure, despite my surprise at the media interest. This is an ongoing matter that is being handled through appropriate channels. My hope is that it leads to positive changes in how we build safe, inclusive communities for everyone. The reporter pressed further. "Do you believe you were targeted because of your race?" I paused, considering my response carefully. What I believe is that assumptions about who belongs in certain spaces can lead to dangerous situations. When police are called on people of color for everyday activities, it creates risks that should not exist. This is not just about me. It is about a broader pattern that needs addressing. The story ran on the evening news, framed as part of a national conversation about racially motivated 911 calls. By morning, it had been picked up by several national outlets. My phone filled with messages from colleagues and friends who had seen the coverage. The Bureau's Public Affairs office contacted me, offering support if I needed it. 3 days after the HOA meeting, I received a formal letter from the police department. They had issued Patricia Wilson a citation for filing a false police report. The letter explained that while more serious charges were being considered, they were offering her the opportunity to participate in a restorative justice program as an alternative. The HOA board moved with surprising speed as well. Martha Jenkins called to inform me that they had unanimously passed new community guidelines explicitly prohibiting discrimination and harassment. They had also formed a diversity and community relations committee and hoped I would consider serving on it. "Your handling of this situation has been remarkable," Martha said. "You had every right to be furious, yet you approached it with such professionalism and focus on community healing. That means a great deal to me, Martha, and yes, I would be honored to serve on the committee." A week after the incident, I received a notification that Patricia Wilson had been served with court papers. The district attorney had decided to proceed with charges under the new state law, citing the need to set precedent in cases of racially motivated false police reports. That evening, I sat in my home office, reflecting on how quickly events had unfolded. Part of me felt satisfaction that systems were working as they should. Another part felt concern about the escalation. My goal had been accountability and education, not public humiliation or severe punishment. I crafted a carefully worded email to the district attorney, expressing my perspective on the case. While I supported accountability, I also believed in proportional response and the possibility of redemption. I suggested that requiring education and community service might be more effective than harsher penalties. As someone who has spent my career in law enforcement, I believe justice is best served when it creates positive change rather than merely punishing past actions, I wrote. Mrs. Wilson's behavior was harmful and potentially dangerous,